and welcome to the Workplace Learning Matter series from Huthwaite International. In this episode, Robin Hoyle explores how top-performing businesses can effectively ensure that learning is transferred to day-to-day work with author, evaluator and workplace learning expert Professor Robert Brinkerhoff. This is the audio recording from that conversation.
First of all, Robert Brinkerhoff, thank you very much for joining us this month. It's great to have you here. And I guess you're most well known for your work on the success case method. And it'd be really interesting just to understand what it is and where that came from.
Yeah, well, it came from, I did a doctoral program in program evaluation at University of Virginia. And I then got engaged in all sorts of evaluation studies, mostly with government contracts, evaluating Department of Defense training programs and the like. And that took me into trying to earn a living as an evaluator is very difficult because not many folks are that interested in finding out if what they're doing is working or not. Right. So I started contracting with different training providers to evaluate their training programs, and one was quite fascinating. That was with Blanchard Training and Development Company, and this was about 25 years ago when their premier program was situational leadership. Sure. So we had a contract to evaluate dozens of situational leadership programs in all sorts of different organizations. And what finally dawned on me, and should have a lot sooner than it did, was that here we were evaluating a training program that was delivered precisely the same way every time it was delivered. The same facilitators, the same, all the same verbiage that went along with it, the same graphics, the same notebooks, exactly the same. But we kept seeing over time vast differences in the impact of the training. So, and we defined impact as were people using their training in their work in a way that would make a difference to their organization goals. Sure. So, but we found all sorts of variability in impact. I mean, you'd go into one company and one business unit was shooting the lights out with their situational leadership training and using it well and all over and growing sales or reducing costs. Another unit in the same company had exactly the same training. Nobody was using it. Even in the same cohort, some people using it and getting great results, some not. So what should have dawned on me a lot earlier as a researcher is that if you're holding the treatment constant, but you're getting different results, something else is going on.
So what were those sorts of things? What were the things that you saw in those companies that were really, as you say, shooting the lights out?
Yeah,
that was different, because it's called the success case method. So clearly, if that's a success, what was different?
So we would always look at the successes and say, so how did they differ from the other? Were they just smarter than the average bear, or what was going on? And in fact, what was going on were some of the same sorts of things we'd find time and again. One was clearly manager support. Some people got sent to the training probably as a punishment, as well as a reward. So some people were unwilling to be there. Some people were very happy to be there. Some people had their manager support to be there. Some did not. Some people had a job where they could really use it and had a need to use it. Others did not. Some people got reinforcement after the training to use it, and recognition. Others did not. So all those something else's fell pretty neatly into when we looked at the successes and the non-successes. They were either things that happened before they got to the training or things that happened after they completed the training that made all the difference, because it wasn't the training itself. That was always exactly the same for everybody.
And one of the things you've talked about is that idea of accountability in the past, the idea that it's not just that people have had a conversation with them, but there's some expectations that have been set.
Yeah.
Just define what those kind of expectations were.
Well, yeah, expectations. Let me just tell you a quick story that comes down on the other side of that. And this was prior to my getting into becoming an evaluator. I was an officer in the U.S. Navy back in the Vietnam era, and a freshly minted officer on my first naval station, which was down in the Caribbean on the little island of Grand Turk. Uh, I got sent for 2 weeks off duty to go up to Norfolk, Virginia, and take a top secret course in how to better. We were tracking Russian submarines at the time, and we had to communicate very quickly with other naval units. So I spent 2 weeks up there learning how to handle high priority top secret messages quickly and route them around the base quickly so everybody was aligned with them. Anyway, spent 2 weeks of that training. Came back to the base, driving my Jeep up onto the base again, came through the gate. There were just a very small unit. We were only 65 people there. The captain, the skipper, was out planting some posies in the front, around the front gate. He loved to plant flowers. And as I pulled in, he said, "Hey, Brinkerhoff." He said, "Well, you've been gone for a while." I said, "Oh, yes, sir, I was." He said, "Oh, that's right. You were up in Norfolk at training, weren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right." And he said, "How'd it go?" "Wonderful," I told him. And he said, "Well, look at and he waxed philosophical for a minute. He said, we can look at the world in two ways. We can look at the world the way they did things up there in Norfolk, and we can look at the world the way we do things down here." And then I said, "Yeah, that's true." And then he said, "So where are you now, Brinkerhoff?" And I said, "Well, I'm here, sir." He said, "Then how are we going to do things?" And I said, "The way we do them here." "That's right." And so he undid in that 1 minute conversation, he undid 2 weeks of training. I took all my materials, I shredded them and put them in the burn bin, which is how you deal with top secret materials. If you're not a president of a country anyway, that's how you deal with them. I never used that training one lick. So that expectation, if he had, on the other hand, said, "So glad you're back. We got to clean up this mess here with communication, and I hope you'll be using this training and talk to me next week about how it's going," would have been a world of difference.
Sure.
But so that expectation was never there to use it. And so I was accountable to meet expectations always, and using that training was not one of them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Since you first started life as an evaluator, you've taken some of the lessons that I guess you've learned from the very different evaluations that you've done, and started to work more around high performance learning journeys.
Right.
Just tell me a little bit about that work that you're doing now, and how that learning from those evaluations that you carried out in many different organizations has come to affect what you do now.
Yeah, and again, Robin, it took sort of embarrassingly a long time to get there. I mean, when I started doing all the evaluation work, the principal approach to training in most organizations was take time away from work, go to a dedicated learning center, take a course, then come back to work. So the training was always separate from the work, and you came back from the training and back to work. So as we learned more and more that the training had to be good, don't get me wrong, you couldn't do lousy, no good training and expect results, but by and large, most of the training that I saw delivered was good enough. But so knowing that it wasn't the training itself, it was the things that happened before the training, like how you were prepared to go, why you went, what expectations you had going in, etc., and the things that happened afterwards, we realized, well, if obviously impact from training is a process, not an event. Mm-hmm. So once we knew it was a process, then it became a struggle of, well, how can you expand the definition of that process so it includes engineering the front end and engineering the back end? And that was a real uphill struggle in most organizations. The way that got interpreted in many places, well, let's send some people some pre-work before they get to the training. Well, pre-work was the kind of stuff that you took out of your briefcase on the train or the airplane on the way to the training to see what they wanted you to do, knowing full well that no one was going to do it anyway. And even if you didn't do it, it wouldn't make a lick of difference. So you put it back in your briefcase and watched the movie instead. So pre-work just didn't do it. In fact, the very definition of pre-work reinforced the notion that it's all about the event. Yeah. So the struggle was to re-envision training and reconceptualize it, not as an event, but a journey, like you say, and also to look at it through a performance improvement lens, not necessarily a learning lens. So it isn't about giving people some stuff to study, have them read it and study it again, and then have them revisit it later. That's a sort of a knowledge perspective, but performance perspective would talk about, let's get the conditions for performance right before we go in. Let's get expectations clear. Let's make sure there's alignment with the training and the person's job. And then the stuff that came afterwards had to be reinforcement of the expectation to use it, coaching if it was needed, opportunity to practice in low risk scenarios, and so on. So that meant you had to stretch it. But stretching it was hard when the whole premise was training was something that happened away from work, sure, not in work.
Sure.
So, I think the biggest accelerator to our whole understanding of learning journeys has been the COVID-19 epidemic. I mean, right. that forced us to break the training up into bits and stretch it out over time. And it wasn't just a matter of chunking up the knowledge stuff into bite-sized pieces and delivering over time, but envisioning it as more of a performance improvement process.
And the fact that most people were undertaking those learning interventions through from home and were working from home, actually there was, for the first time, certainly in my 30-odd years in the industry, for the first time we had training actually happening in the workplace in a really meaningful way. Now, I know there are things that have happened in the past, people have done apprenticeships and things like that for years and years and years. But this was different in that the environment in which people were, the tools that they were using, whether it was Zoom or Teams or whatever, the access to resources via their corporate intranet that were beamed to their back bedroom or their kitchen table, whatever it was, that created, or rather broke, that idea of training being something you went away to do.
Yes, yeah. No,
and it was much easier for people to do things straight away,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so that clearly all of that really helped immensely to that we had no choice but to stretch it out. And you couldn't expect people to sit for a 2-day workshop at home. Just couldn't be done. Had to do something differently.
Now you've talked about evaluation and performance improvement, and the idea of the point of training is for people to do things differently. So where do you see people are getting that right? What sorts of things are they doing to ensure that there is, first of all, that manager involvement, but also that there is an environment which in some cases just allows people to do things differently when they return to work, whatever that means.
I think the first thing that I've seen successful organizations doing and successful learning and development leaders doing is being really clear up front on the value proposition of the training. I mean, frankly, a good percentage of training that's done in organizations is not intended to change performance. You think about emergency training pilots how to land a fully loaded 747 aircraft when the landing gear don't come down, training pilots to be able to do that. We hope they never use that.
Yeah.
So the expectation, if you're using that on a daily basis, we got other problems. So there's within training is not sort of a uniform concept. It's got variance. So some training is done as a staff benefit. you can't try to hire people and retain them if you don't offer them some kind of career growth. So some of it's done as staff benefit. Some is done as a regulatory requirement. You simply have to have people through it and record it, that you did it. Some of it is for just career growth and helping people advance in their careers, even in a different organization. So be very clear on but then there's some training that's sort of make or break for the organization, where we're talking about executing a new strategic initiative that requires new behaviors. So getting very clear first on the value proposition. Is this training that we expect and need people to use in their work? And if the answer to that is yes, then let's design it in a way that will make it work, rather than designing it in ways that match all those other expectations. Now, if people arrive in a training, get engaged in a training, and they're not clear on the value proposition either, then there's trouble. So that value proposition has to be communicated up to senior leadership and all the way down to participants, that no, this is different from the training you did last week, Robin. This stuff, we actually care. We want you to use it. And we're going to make sure you're using it, and give you feedback. And we're going to give you time to practice it. And we're going to give you some coaching and feedback. So that constructing it as a journey and constructing it as a performance improvement journey is what needs to be done if using it is what you're after.
About that activity back in the workplace, the idea that the skills that you are helping people to develop are integral to the role. They are required by the organization. We've developed a value proposition. For people like me, I work with large corporate organizations, but I'm not an employee of those corporate organizations. Right. I have to get that communication around the senior team and around the line managers. And what are the barriers that people are facing there, and how are they overcoming them?
Yeah, well, that's I think a good part of the barrier, and I know you as a vendor trying to sell training run into, is that often the buyers, our customers, don't really understand. They may not be clear on the value proposition. They are used to, if we look at the sort of the history of training and development over the last 50 years, training was often sort of bought by the pound. You went to the annual training conference and you visited the vendor booths, and they showed you their notebooks, and they said, now look at this one, Robin. I want you to open the front cover here. Look at it's got an insert right here for the audio tapes. Everything's all in one package here. And the heft of that notebook, nice thick cover, beautiful. So people were buying training, not results. Yeah. And once they purchased the training, they figured, done and dusted. We've got it. Now all we got to do is just run people through it. So the barrier, I think, is helping our customers whether you're internal or external, you're still in exactly the same role. You're in a sales role. Yeah. So and the highest art of selling is consultation, helping your client succeed. So understand helping them understand that, no, you don't just need training, you need the results the training can get you. The training is the means, not the end. And now if they're saying, no, you don't understand, Robin, we just got to we need some training, we need it next week, and we don't have 3 days, we only got 1 day, so what can you pair out of? So often they're commodity buyers, and in that case, it's very difficult. But in the case where the client needs the results, and then I think we help them understand what it's going to take to get to those results. And I think one of the most useful things anybody can ever do, and this is where evaluation comes full circle to this, is if you're running up against a client that's resistant to making it a journey, which is pretty much all of them, say, look, you got 3,000 people you need to train. let's do this. Let's take 60 of them right now and put something on, and then come back and let's visit it and see how it went. So sell a pilot, not the whole work. Now I know that's anathema to a salesperson who's compensated for the numbers that they put through. But for the internal people, that's an easier struggle. But that's what I think we've got to do, is sell the pilot, demonstrate the proof of concept, show them that it works, and when it works, tell them why it worked, and say, you may have noticed 30 people got great results, 30 people didn't. We looked into why that was the case. Those 30 people that got the good results, their manager actually spent some time with them. So before we do the next round, let's do some manager education and make sure that you're not just pouring money down a rat hole here.
Yeah. And do you find that the managers themselves, once they're clear about what their role is, are reasonably happy to undertake? It's when it seems like a mystery, or it seems extra, that we see resistance. They don't know what to do. They're scared that they might get it wrong. And what's more, I've got enough on my plate already. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
How from your evaluations and from the stuff that you've been doing on high performance learning journeys, how have you seen people overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah. Well, I think, first off, I think you got to recognize the reality that probably most managers define support for training as permission to go.
Yeah.
So, well, I gave Robin some time to go. What else do you expect? I'm busy. The rest is up to him. So I think we need to give them a definition of what it means to support training, and not ask them to do it all the time, but again, make sure that the value proposition is very clear. There's probably only 10% of the training that your direct reports go to where you really need to give them a lot of support. So be very clear when it's needed. And then where I think evaluation helps immensely is give them some evidence that it works. Don't ask them to do something that you can't back up with evidence that it will work. And don't say, well, research shows if you do it, Robin. So let me bring you some data that shows you that 3 of your colleagues that have increased their sales 30% over the last 6 months, they're doing some things differently from the average Bayer manager. And some of those things are these things: having a 15-minute conversation with people before you put them in this training and make clear what you expect from them, meeting with them afterwards. Those sometimes 30 minutes of manager intervention can make a huge difference in whether people end up using it or not. So I think it's incumbent on us to don't ask managers to do anything that we don't have evidence that would make a difference. And when it works, give them evidence. And when it's not working, let them know why it didn't work. Managers are paid to get results. They're compensated on results. If you can show them that it's going to help them get a result that matters to them, they're on your side.
Yes, and at the end of the day, it comes down to the what's in it for me factor, doesn't it?
Sure. Well, I think a mistake that we've made in learning and development over the years is approaching managers as a supplicant. So if I'm learning and development, and Robin, I know you got 30 people over here. Look, we want it to work. You could really help me out if you just do these things, rather than approaching them as a consultant and saying, Robin, I know you got your back against the wall to increase sales in the next quarter. I'd like to talk to you about some ways that might help you do that. Very different.
Very different.
Yeah.
Very different. Rob Brinkerhoff, it's been an absolute joy talking to you. Thank you ever so much for your time. And I hope and pray that other people will pick up on some of these things and will really learn from your experience of trying things out, testing what works, and then going back with the evidence, which I think we can all say that's got to be the important stuff.
Absolutely.
Rob, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for the opportunity to do this. It's been a joy to talk with you, and I'm sorry our time is up as fast as it was.